Welcome to The Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. And now your host, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. Today I'm joined by Tim Little, CEO and founder of Zana Investments. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you. Great to be here, George.
Awesome. We have a great story in real estate. Now, sometimes I kind of skip the question of how did you get your start in real estate, but I really love your story. So take us back to the beginning. Where did you start in real estate?
Yeah, and so I guess, like a lot of people, I had a lot of like skips and starts. There's those times where you think you're gonna, go into real estate and become this mega mogul, and then it just doesn't work out that way. I think for a lot of people, that first time happened, around 2005, 2006, when things were really heating up and there was enough infomercials that everybody could become a multifamily millionaire. So I did my part and, bought a $600 CD set on Driving for Dollars and all that stuff. But timing wasn't right. And so really didn't get my start in real estate then. And I think I'm kind of thankful that I didn't, because we all know how that story turned out, just a few short years later. And so then I really got rekindled after reading, Rich Dad, Poor Dad again several years later, when I was in the right place and right mindset to actually get started. And that was simply buying a duplex, right? Like nothing fancy. I knew I wanted to get into real estate. I knew it was a good path to wealth, but I didn't want to own single family because I just felt like there was too great a risk in single family. It wasn't scalable. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get a duplex. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And as you know, then as now, it was a very expensive market. So it wasn't one of those places where I could buy in my backyard. So went down to Richmond, Virginia, toured probably 6 different duplexes just on a weekend and got to see downtown Richmond and all that, and wound up putting a down payment on an $85,000 duplex over there. And that was how I really got my start in that. And I wouldn't say fell in love with it, because there's plenty of horror stories, but that was where I got my start for sure.
All right, awesome. I thought you were an accidental landlord before that. Is that correct? You were renting your primary residence?
Yeah, and I guess I don't really count that as real estate investing because it wasn't intentional. You know what I mean? So once I decided that I was going to buy for the purpose of investing, that's why I count the duplex. But you're right. Had my personal residence, had to move and rented it out and saw the potential there. But given the market timing, again, this was around the 2006 to 8 timeframe. I was lucky to break even when I sold it. So did amazing appreciation that a lot of people see. I was probably breaking even, maybe getting $100 cash flow from the rent. So it wasn't like, I wouldn't say the aha moment was there, because it wasn't like raining money from that deal for sure.
Right. Well, I wanted you to tell that part of the story because I want to say, I feel like no two stories are alike, but a lot of your elements in your story are similar to me, because I started out as that accidental landlord, didn't really treat it like a business, and went to graduate school feeling like a broke graduate student, and then getting my real start later on. So I love that story. I think there are probably a lot of people out there like that. Maybe you have one unit and you're just listening to this podcast wondering what's out there next. It can happen. You can stay at one unit for any number of years and then just decide, hey, I'm going to grow this thing. And then next thing you know, you might be standing here with, say, $60 million of assets under management.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that point that it almost doesn't matter where you start, but start somewhere, because the potential is always there to grow and build that business, even if you're starting from that house that you owned and now rent out, or whether it's a duplex or a 100-unit building. It almost doesn't matter as long as you get started, I think.
Right now, you've also been a passive investor, and I think that's a pretty cool story. because I think it's a great way to get started. Why don't you tell us about how you invested in your first syndication and what that felt like when the money finally came?
Yeah, and so it was one of those things where, I didn't know syndication was a thing. And I think that's where most people are at, especially in the single family or small multifamily space. They're figuring it out. They're trying to run it like a business, but they don't know how to make it scale. So I wound up going to one of these conferences that was, specific to multifamily, to the syndication space. And I was like, oh, okay, this actually makes a lot of sense. And I started to entertain the idea of doing it myself, but knew that, again, the timing wasn't right for me to do that. Despite the $20,000-$30,000 program they were trying to pitch me relentlessly at the at the event, I politely said no, thank you. But what I did do is say that, hey, I want to get in as a passive investor because, for two reasons. One, to make money, right? Who doesn't want to see their money grow on their behalf while they're not doing anything, but also so that I could learn. And that's one of the advantages that I try to get across to people who are thinking about passively investing is, rather than going through a program and paying, $25,000, you have the potential to invest that $25,000, see it grow, and have the ability to ask questions, right? That's one right that you gain as a passive investor is you get the right to ask questions about how the deal is going, how does it work? And so that's the opportunity that I saw there. And I was about to go on a deployment to Iraq. So I knew I wouldn't be able to get started on the active side of things anyways. So this really gave me an opportunity to just kind of see if this was a real thing. And I got to tell you, they started distributions relatively quick because it was a fairly stabilized property. And so when I saw that first distribution check, you kind of like wipe your brow and you're like, whew, all right. So I am not going to be on the next episode of American Greed, and this is a real thing. And yeah, it was a huge relief, and that's where, the light bulb kind of went off that, hey, this is a real thing. There are huge benefits to it, and it might be something that I could do myself.
So yeah, there's so much about your story I just love. I mean, the $20,000 to $30,000 that you might have spent on a coaching program may or may not have made you an awesome investor, but $25,000 into a real estate syndication, that can produce some pretty solid returns. And also, yeah, the timing, I just love that too. I mean, a lot of people may not be ready to jump in, but wow, doing some passive stuff first is really cool. So yeah, awesome. And then also you mentioned that you did pick a stabilized property, because I know how that is. Even experienced investors, if they invest in something that isn't stabilized and you don't get any distributions for a year, it's hard.
Yeah, and I think it was like a B to a B plus. And so it was a value add, but not a heavy value add. And I tell you, the other thing that I didn't mention is that it's really valuable doing passive investing prior to getting on the active side, because it gives you the passive investor's perspective, right? You understand that sense of anxiety, I guess, and fear is the best way to put it, for those first time investors who are putting a huge amount of trust in you as the operator when they hand over that $25,000, $50,000, whatever it might be. So the more that you can empathize and understand their concerns, wants, and needs, I think that's only going to make you a better operator.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad the way you put that it does give you the passive investor's perspective, because when you're there, not getting distributions, not knowing what's going on with the project, not getting necessarily a lot of communications, you know how that feels when you've got $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 in a deal. And I think it makes you a whole lot less likely to go out and then be that syndicator that isn't communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. You're much more cognizant of it, and it's something that I would say you're more aware of, so you definitely are more likely to avoid those missteps.
Yeah, good. Okay, so obviously you've done a lot of things since you got your start in real estate. You did mention a few things to me in your bio, for example, about being in strategic communication. So maybe you could tell us what that is and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got off of active duty in 2008, I was trying to find a way to leverage my skills and got hooked up with a government contractor, Booz Allen Hamilton. And what I was doing with them was strategic communications, and that's basically helping organizations plan their communications, build out the strategy for it, ensuring that that communication is consistent. We talk about communication fratricide, which is one person in your organization saying one thing and another saying another, or you can have communication mismatch, which is, you're saying one thing, but actually doing another. And neither are good. So, and you especially don't want that in government. So that's what I was doing, helping government clients with that. And then following that, I wound up getting a job at HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, as the head of their communications for multifamily housing. So that involved more the speech writing for the head of multifamily, and also ensuring consistency of communication from HUD itself out to the other HUD locations that they have, the satellite locations, whether it's Atlanta, Chicago, making sure that everyone understands and is pushing out the policies and changes to all the stakeholders.
Great. And I know another one of your talents is finding solutions to problems. I think that relates to your military experience. Maybe you could give us some examples.
Sure. And so, I guess, a good example is the one thing the military is really good at is throwing you into a situation and having it be sink or swim, right? Like, it's not enough to say, well, I don't have the proper skills and attributes for this position. I don't think I may be qualified. They say, hey, you're going to do this and you're going to make it work. And so, I remember being, 26 years old and a meeting with government leaders in southern Baghdad and saying, okay, fix their government meetings because they're not very efficient. And, I was like, I'm not a government expert. But then you start to see the problems that are obvious from an outsider's perspective. And I think that's what happens a lot. People who are on the inside, it's hard for them to see the issues because they're part of the issue. So having that outsider's perspective and being able to assess from the outside and then present potential solutions. Not all of those solutions are going to work because, maybe it's not right culturally or doesn't make sense for their organization. But I think that's one of the places where I really learned to assess situations, develop solutions, try them out. Some don't work. So then you try other things until you get to the one that really sticks. And I think that's been just as useful in multifamily syndication in terms of, you're looking at a property and you're saying, okay, how is this managed currently and how could I make it better? Right? Is it running efficiently? Is it not? Do they have the appropriate number of personnel working in the places where they need to, or are they overstaffed? So looking at all these, different elements of how a property is run, and then finding ways to make it more efficient and to make it just a better business, a better property.
Yeah, just amazing what people can accomplish when you decide that failure is not an option. That sort of leads us into the next one of your key talents, which is managing teams. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. And so as a military officer, I'm in the Army specifically. That is our primary responsibility is management, is what it really comes down to for the officer side of the house. Currently, I'm the commander of a public affairs battalion equivalent, right? So I don't need to be an expert at each one of their jobs, be they photographer, videographer, graphics editor, but I need to understand what they do and how best to employ them, where their talents can be put to best use, and create a plan around how to put those talents to use. So I think that's where it really comes in, not necessarily needing to be an expert on everything, but understanding how each piece works and how best to employ it so that you can succeed in whatever your plan is.
Yeah, excellent. So whoever's out there thinking, wow, my skills are very different from what it takes to be a multifamily landlord, owner, or syndicator, whatever you're doing, probably something that translates. So I hope this is resonating for people out there. I know another thing that you're doing now is you're hosting a podcast. You just had your 25th episode released, Journey to Multifamily Millions. This is something you've really lived. You started with a duplex, and I believe you're currently with $60 million assets under management.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's been a long road, but when you think you can't even get into one deal, and there was a time where I was like, I don't see how I'm going to do this. And a lot of people get stuck at that place. But once you get past that one deal, Michael Blank talks about, the law of the first deal and all that. It's really about the connections that you make and the people that you know, because once people see that you're capable, see that they can trust you, and you're a good person that they want to deal with, right? A lot of it comes down to that. People may not give a whole lot of credence to personality, but if you partner with someone that you can't stand, that partnership is not going to go well at all. And so I was lucky to find partners that I work with well. There's a lot of synergy between us. And so it really went from, doing that first deal where it was a bunch of scrappy folks trying to get their first deal who all kind of banded together to take it down, which gave us that initial experience and credibility that we needed. That first one being a 59 unit here in Tampa. And that deal was done with a bunch of folks that I met at a Rod Khleif conference that took place in Tampa. We all stayed in touch. They tried to pitch me on being a passive investor, and I was like, no, I want to save my money so that I could do my own deal, because everybody came out wanting to do their own deal. But at a certain
Imagine
point,
that.
Right. So if nothing else, it worked to motivate everyone. And so they came back, a few months later towards the tail end of that deal, and they're like, hey, if you still have that capital available, we really could use you and that money to get this deal across the finish line. They knew that I was local, which is obviously an asset for them. I lived in Tampa. That's where the deal was. So I could be boots on ground and provide the expertise that I had, but also bring that money to get it across the finish line. And that's what we were able to do. And so, just getting that first deal, it's not about how big it is or how much money you're making from it. It's really about just getting the deal so that you learn as much as you possibly can during that process, and so that you get the credibility, because then you could say, hey, I am, a GP on a 59 unit portfolio deal. And it's instant credibility both for potential investors and for other operators.
Absolutely. You get one solid deal under your belt, things are moving. Now, I know over the last few years, we've seen a lot of exponential growth of operators. Don't know if the next year or two will look like that, but I think that once things shake out, we may have another long runway. Could be a great time for people to get involved. This might be a great time to be a passive investor with somebody who's experienced. But again, if you can find that good first solid deal right now, you're going to be in a great position when things start to shake out.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think you're right that there's definitely going to be some shaking out, and some of the irrational exuberance that took place over the last couple of years, where people were going full cycle on deals in 18 months, getting, 2x equity.
Yes,
multipliers.
my second syndication as a passive investor, I want to say it was well within a year. We went full cycle. So that was fun. And I've had some pretty great tailwinds for my first few active deals. This has been a great time to be in the business. So if you bought right, even a year ago, you are feeling real good about it now.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of lessons in the next year or two, though, based on how people's deals have been structured. So I'm looking forward to all the lessons myself. But as long as we weather the storm, I think we'll all be all right.
So let's lead into, what are you doing to weather this economic storm that's coming? How have the deals you've been seeking, or maybe the markets that you're seeking them in, changed?
Yeah, so I don't think the markets for me personally have changed because I focus on fundamentals, right? I look at population growth as my number one, job growth as my number two, and then job diversity as my number three. So I think if you have all three of those elements in whatever market you're buying in, you're going to be somewhat insulated from what may come. But we're definitely having to make adjustments on the deals that we're looking at now. I think the biggest one is lending, right? For a
Yes.
while, bridge debt was what you wanted.
Hmm.
Bridge debt with 3 years interest only, you'll just refinance later and everything will be fine. But when rates are only climbing upwards and rates are already, not quite double what they were a
Right.
year or two ago, but getting there, that probably doesn't make sense nowadays. So, you're looking at different things like agency debt or, owner financing, stuff like that. Having to get a little more creative about how you look at it than instead of going to the what seemed like a default for a year or two, which was just going to that bridge debt and then potentially refining if you don't get your exit in, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'll hit you with another one. What about recourse debt? That's something I'm seeing a lot more. These banks, they just really don't like the idea of non-recourse like they did in the past. It may have been a lot easier to get, but looking at a deal right now where the idea is, sure, we'll take a recourse loan because it's going to be, we can't assume the loan that's currently in place, but the lender wants to keep it. So they're going to give us a pretty sweet deal, but it's got to be recourse.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's still nervous, but yeah, and I
right.
definitely probably going to see it more because banks are just a little timid right now, and
Yeah.
they want lower leverage. So
Yeah, absolutely. And LTV, that's another one that's been a problem. I mean, compressed cap rates have been an issue, but now it's on the lending side. The lenders, they just want a little bit more of your skin in the game. So, yeah, that was another cool thing about that. They were going to give us 20% down payment, 80% LTV. So it's interesting to see how things are headed. In many ways, the banks are just really playing hardball, but kind of an interesting balancing act. I saw, just curious if you had any other stories, war stories from the front of investing in turbulent times.
no, I would just say that like, with rates going up, a lot of us with bridge loans, we're feeling the hurt a little bit. The biggest differentiator is, those rate caps. We've recently you've had to get rate caps, and that's
Yeah.
been a bank requirement in a lot of instances. And I've seen rate caps costing $800,000, which can just straight kill a deal right off the bat. But if you go, I'd say like, a year and a half back when rate caps weren't required, a lot of people didn't get them because no one saw a need. And so
Right.
those are the deals where people are probably in a bad place right now. I count myself lucky that on a deal we've just been in it, say about a year now. It's been a little over a year and a month maybe. And we did get a rate cap, but we got it at like 100,000. And we're still hurting a little bit just from a cash flow perspective because of the rate increases. But at the same time, if we didn't have that rate cap, it would really be bad.
Right. And I remember even it seems a year ago, certainly 2 years ago, people who got rate caps made it sound like, wow, we are so conservative. And now it's funny how something in the past you could say like, wow, we're really operating by best practices. And now this is much more of a common practice. I'd like to talk more about the landlord side of things. I'm sure with so many properties, you've got to have some great landlord stories. Any crazy tenants, any stories that you could actually tell on the air?
I mean, I self-managed a triplex that I had here in St. Pete. So that's where you're like closest to the issue,
Right.
right? When you're on the syndicator side, you're at least one level removed. So in the time that I was self-managing the triplex, I had two of my tenants arrested for different things at different times. The first one, he just didn't pay the rent, and it was unusual. So, I asked the other tenants, hey, have you heard from this guy? And they joked that he was probably arrested, and I laughed it off. But luckily, Florida has that whole mugshot thing where they post everyone's mugshot. It's like public, public knowledge.
Florida
Um,
man.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So sure enough, I did a couple of searches first in the, the county that the property was in, and then my own county, which is neighboring, and found him and saw the description: pulled over with greater than 25 pounds of marijuana in vehicle. And I was
Now,
like,
how big of a bag is that? I just want to know. I mean, they say that a pound of feathers and a pound of bricks weighs the same, but I mean, the sack is definitely a different size.
yeah, I mean, 25 pounds at a minimum, that is greater than the size of one of my children. So needless to say, I didn't expect that he was going to be coming back to pay rent. His girlfriend posted bail for him, so they were able to move his stuff out. And it's just these things that you learn on the fly. It's really interesting. I found myself Googling, how do I get stuff out of a tenant's unit if they've been arrested? And there's laws around it, right? You can't just go in there and throw everything out. There's certain things that you have to do. And so I literally, did online visitation with him in prison and told him that, hey, I'm going to be sending this letter to you that asks you to release yourself from lease so that you could go ahead, get your stuff out of there, and then I can rent it out again. Just so that I wouldn't be accused of stealing. I wouldn't be accused of breaking and entering. All these things that, I didn't really learn were even a risk until I started researching it, which I'm glad I did. But I'm just like, man, I'm having, online video conferences with a guy in jail to ask him. And luckily he was very gracious about it. So we got the unit back. They moved everything out in the dead of night after he posted bail. So it worked out. Like, it could have been a lot worse. But again, just one of those things you don't want to have to deal with. And then you just have random weird things like, getting a call saying, my bedroom is infested with bees. And you're like, wait, what? Bees had created a nest inside the windowsill, and like it was an entire hive. And so then I had to call a bee guy to have them removed, and the tenants wanted to make sure that it was done humanely and all this stuff. And you're like,
goodness. You're killing me, man.
right. So sure enough, they cut out the entire like portion, or they were able to smoke them out humanely and all this. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Like, you can't make this stuff up.
No, it's too good. And that's why I love property managers. I mean, I got a few stories of my own, even last week. Some dude had cut these holes in the wall with like a broom handle and just bashed it in, like dozens of holes. And he said, I need a new unit. Why? Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on here. No, you do not get a new unit. We are evicting you. Anyway, he wasn't paying, so that made it easy. But love the story and talking about how you did it all legally, because yes, a lot of landlords don't really understand. It looks like a place is abandoned and they think they can just enter, or you have personal property left behind. That didn't happen in your case. And then if you don't do something with that, I know it's different states, different rules, but it might be of value over X dollars that you've got to hold on to it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Reddit and all these and blogs, all great sources of information. But the nice thing is then you can pass whatever you learned on to someone else when they're in that situation, which is exactly what I did. I wrote a blog on it, and I was like, hey, maybe someone will find value in this and save themselves, an hour or two of research.
All right. Yeah. If you didn't get a ton of downloads on that, then I just feel like you're cheated, because that is an awesome story. So let me just see. I have to admit, my computer froze. That's where I keep all my notes. We'll just wing it for a few minutes. Okay. So what about the process building your empire? So again, you start from a duplex, you're a huge operator. Now, in between, how did you develop your systems?
Yeah, and so I'm still developing systems, right? Like it doesn't stop. I think that's one of the mistakes that I made is, I'm naturally frugal. I don't want to spend more money than I have to. And I think one of the places that I was reluctant to spend money was on my business in places where I should have, in building out those systems earlier on so that it allowed me to scale faster. And I already had the, kind of infrastructure in place. So as an example, we discussed earlier, I just hired my first virtual assistant.
Mhm.
And before that, it's all you, right? Like you're doing all these things and probably a lot of things where that you shouldn't be doing, that maybe don't add a lot of value in terms of the skills that you have. And so I think that's one of the things that I would have done sooner in terms of the scale and the systems. But it started out with just having a CRM. Listening to folks, reading books. I was like, I need to have a CRM, a way to capture who I'm talking to, potential investors, and get emails out to those folks. And I didn't want to have to just use an Excel spreadsheet because I knew I'd be doing this for a while. So if I am going to be doing it for a while, I might as well get that in on the ground level. That way I don't have to do that work of like transferring things over from one system to another, things like that. So I think that was really one of the first pieces in addition to like a website, right? Just having a simple website, nothing fancy. Like mine was built on Wix. I built my first one and then later got someone on Fiverr to make it look a little nicer. But having that website where people can go to verify, like, yeah, he's legit. Yeah, he's, he has a real business. And the other one that I think people forget who are, trying to make themselves look professional is the email. Like you cannot go to investors, brokers, other GPs with a at Gmail or at Yahoo email and expect to be taken seriously. And I think that's a fair judgment. When it only costs, $100 a year, whatever it is, to have a at your business name email, then that is the money that you need to be spending, vice, some of this other stuff that we get kind of focused on.
Yeah. Great approaches all, and good to realize there is more than one way. You don't just have to hire somebody locally. You don't just have to have a VA. There's also these Upwork, Fiverr. You can go to freelancers. So yeah, I've done all of the above. It's good stuff. And you have any tips with using these freelancers?
So, I mean, it's really, I just look for what was in my budget and then I look at reviews,
Yeah.
right? I wasn't willing to take chances on people who had no experience. And then if I went too cheap, it showed. And so I learned maybe I'll go a little bit higher on my budget scale. But otherwise, yeah, I was doing the one-off on Fiverr thing, and it was pretty useful for me. Again, even things like SEO. I don't know anything about SEO. I tried to educate myself a little bit, but having someone even do a one-time thing and go on your website and do SEO and be like, oh yeah, you didn't have this, and this on the back end.
Right.
I'm willing to pay someone $150 or whatever it is to
Yeah.
go from the third page of Google rankings to the first.
Love it. Now, do you have a favorite acquisition that you'd like to tell a story of?
Oh, favorite acquisition. I don't know that I have a favorite. It's hard to say like, oh, even especially when you're in the deals,
Right.
because some that you think are your best deals, the tides turn, and then all of a sudden it's not as pretty as it was before. Whereas other deals, you're like, it may not have been as sexy, but the consistency at which it's performed outweighs all. So I don't know. For me, I'd say like that first one, as cliched as that sounds, that first duplex that I got, because like I said, I bought it for 85,000, which at the time was a lot for me, right? Putting down that 25,000 approximately as the down payment, that was a big chunk for me in my first big foray into real estate investing. And then I think it was 3 to 4 years later, I wound up selling it for 150,000 with no inspection. And I was like, okay. And this was like 100-year-old house that
Wow.
they had basically just split into two. So there's things wrong with it. So to be able to sell it at exactly you're asking with no inspection, I was like, sold.
I love it. That is an awesome story. Now, I wish we had 10, 20, 30 minutes to go deeper, but I think we're going to have to head into the lightning round. You ready, Tim?
Absolutely.
All right, let's hit it. So tell us something about one of your real estate markets that most people wouldn't know.
Yeah, so I think I'll go with Atlanta. All right, because I just closed on 170 unit property there last month. And most people don't realize that Atlanta is still hot, both figuratively and literally.
Atlanta.
Exactly. It's for a reason. The average vacancy right now is down to 4.4%, and the average rent is up to $1,600, which is almost 10% increase year over year. And the big reason for that is simply jobs. We hear a lot about mass layoffs, especially in tech and stuff like that. But Atlanta businesses are still hiring and people are still moving there. So it's still an excellent market.
Love it. Heard a lot of great things about Atlanta recently. What is some advice you would give your younger self?
Yeah, and that's such a great question because it kind of like forces us to reflect on what we could have done better. Um, and I would say, as cliche as it sounds, that your network is your net worth, right? And I talked about this a little bit, but relationships are so important, whether you want to get that corporate dream job coming out of college or be a successful entrepreneur. Who you know can really be the key to success, or it can at least shorten the timeline. I mean, you can grind your way to your goals, but if you meet the right people, they can just open that door for you and you can step right in.
Love it. What's the best real estate advice you've ever received?
I think it's that when you're buying an apartment building, you're buying a business. And I think it's intuitive to a certain extent, but when you're coming from that small multifamily space, buying duplexes and triplexes, it's something that you need to be reminded of, because in commercial multifamily, that business plan and the business acumen of those operators is crucial to the success of those deals.
Love the business owner's perspective. What is a mistake you see people out there making that you'd like to help them avoid?
And I think it goes to this like piece of advice that I hear from, I won't even call them gurus, just people in real estate, which is, burn the bridges. If you want to be an active real estate investor,
Quit your job today.
Yeah, exactly. Quit your W-2 job now, and it'll leave you no option but to be successful. Like, no, no. Always have a plan. I transitioned into doing this full time completely with a plan. I went on active duty orders for about 4 years, voluntarily, and I knew I was going to be coming off. And so about a year out, I started saving up money, right? That makes sense. And so I was like, after I get off orders, I want to do this full time. So I'll save up enough money that I can continue to pay my mortgage for at least 2 years so that I can get my business off the ground and hopefully don't have to go back to a W-2 job. But that gave, me and my wife more so, the peace of mind that we wouldn't be in a bad place financially, that, the essentials would still be covered.
Awesome. Let's take a nod to the randomness in the universe. And you know the drill. We got these random question cards. Just tell me to stop cutting the deck.
And stop.
Aha. What was your favorite childhood meal?
Meal. Oh, man. I guess I probably mac and cheese. Like, even though I do not like it now and my kids would eat it every day if I allowed them, box, Kraft macaroni and cheese. It was one of the first things I learned how to cook as a kid. And I was pretty proud of myself. And so, yeah, that was one of my favorite meals.
Love it. Yeah, I think I love that too. If I had to answer that question, I would say if I was going to answer something a little out of the ordinary, I used to like Colby cheese with hot sauce. I don't know why. Does not appeal to me now, but I remember going in front of the TV with that many a time, and with mac and cheese as well. Cheese is great. All
Yeah.
right, name a book that has helped to forge you as a leader and as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about this one, and going to go a little bit outside the box here and say Washington by Ron Chernow. It's a biography on George Washington, and if you ever want to feel inadequate, just read about all the things that George Washington accomplished by the age of 30, and I promise you will. It's really interesting because we usually only hear about successes of people like him. But when I read this, I really found out about his personal and military defeats, and that made me just more impressed by what he was able to accomplish and the person he ended up being.
Excellent pick. Can you give us a quote to help forge our listeners as leaders and entrepreneurs?
I think from a leadership perspective, for me, it's really about taking just responsibility, right? Take responsibility in everything that you do. Don't try to place blame. Don't try to divert. Don't try to make excuses. If you have extreme accountability for everything that you are responsible for, people will respect you more for it, and you will be seen more as a leader.
And how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, I try to stay super active on LinkedIn, so definitely link up with me there. But also you can email me, tim@zanainvestments.com. Always happy to hear from folks and answer any questions. And if they'd like to get my passive investor cheat sheet, which is a list of all the words that passive investors should know if they're getting into this business, written in simple, plain language, I promise, they can go to zanainvestments.com/cheat sheet.
All right. Excellent giveaway. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and experience with our audience.
No, thank you, George. It's been great.